Hello, everybody. Hi. Okay, I'm going to tell the story about how I came to write my book, The Psychopath Test, and then I will diagnose you as psychopaths. This journey started out, I was at a friend's house, and she had on her shelf a copy of the DSM manual, which is the manual of mental disorders. Does anyone know this manual? Yeah, it used to be very slim back in the 1950s. It was like a pamphlet. There were very few mental disorders in the 50s. And then it grew and grew. And there's currently 374 mental disorders. It's 886 pages long. So I was looking through this book wondering if I had any mental disorders. And it turns out that I have 12. I've got nightmare disorder, which is categorized if you have recurrent dreams of being pursued or declared a failure, and all my dreams involve. I've got generalized anxiety disorder, which frankly I didn't need a book to tell me. I've got parent-child relational problems, which I blame my parents for. So I was looking through this book, wondering if I was much crazier than I thought I was, or maybe it's not a good idea to diagnose yourself with a mental disorder if you're not a trained professional, or maybe the psychiatry profession has a kind of strange desire to label what's essentially normal human behavior as a mental disorder. And I didn't know which of these things was true, but I thought it'd be fun to maybe go on a journey to find out, so I thought maybe the first thing I should do is meet some critics of psychiatry to get their view, which is how I ended up having lunch with the Scientologists. And the Scientologists have a crack team of psychiatry destroyers. And I had lunch with their English head, who's a guy called Brian, and I said, can you prove to me that your theory is true, that psychiatry is a wicked pseudoscience that can't be trusted? And Brian said, yes, I can prove it to you. And I said, how? And Brian said, I can introduce you to Tony. So I said, who's Tony? And Brian said, Tony's in Broadmoor. And I said, what did he do? And Brian said, hardly anything, but that's not the point. He said he beat someone up or something, but that's not the point. The point is that he faked madness to escape a prison sentence, and now he's stuck in Broadmoor, having faked madness, and nobody will believe him when he says he's sane. Do you want us to get you into Broadmoor to meet Tony? So I said, yes, please. So I got the train to Broadmoor. I began to yawn uncontrollably around Kempton Park, which is what dogs also do when anxious. And I met Brian, and we were taken through high security, gate after gate after gate, into the wellness centre, which is where you get to meet the patients in Broadmoor. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Broadmoor. It's all very calming colours, like peach and pines, and the only bold colours are the reds of the panic buttons. And the patients started drifting in, and they were all quite overweight and wearing sweatpants, and Brian, the Scientologist, whispered to me, they're medicated, which to Brian is like the worst evil in the world as a Scientologist, but I'm thinking it's presumably a good idea. And then Brian said, here's Tony. And a man was walking towards me, and he wasn't overweight. He was in excellent physical condition, and he wasn't wearing sweatpants. He was wearing a pinstripe suit, and he had his arm outstretched like somebody out of The Apprentice. He was walking towards me, and it was evidently the outfit of a man who wanted to convince me that he was very sane. So he sat down, and I said, is it true that you faked your way in here? And he said, yeah, I beat somebody up when I was 17 in Reading, and I was on remand, and my cellmate said to me, you're looking at 5 to 7 years. What you need to do is fake madness. Tell him you're mad, you'll get sent to some cushy hospital, you have your own PlayStation. I said, so how did you do it? He said, well, I asked to see the prison psychiatrist, and I said to him that I wanted to watch women as they died because it would make me feel more normal. So I said, well, where'd you get that from? And I said, oh, from a biography of Ted Bundy that they had in the prison library. But anyway, I faked madness too well They didn't send me to some cushy hospital, they sent me to Broadmoor. So the minute I got here, I asked to see the psychiatrist. I said, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I said, how long have you been here for? And he said, well, if I'd just done my time for the GBH, I'd have got 5 to 7 years. I've been in Broadmoor for 12 years. He said, the hard part, you see, it's much harder to convince people that you're sane than it is to convince them that you're crazy, right? Like, how do you sit in a sane way? Like, the more you try and sit in a sane way, you come over as just nuts. He said, so I thought the easiest thing to do would be to talk to people normally about, normal things like football and what's on TV. He said, I subscribe to New Scientist because I like reading about scientific breakthroughs. And one time they had an article about how the US Army was training bumblebees to sniff out explosives. So I said to a nurse, did you know that the US Army is training bumblebees? So when I saw my medical notes, they'd written, believes bees can sniff out explosives. I remember when he told me that, I thought it was a good idea that I hadn't met any psychiatrist when I was writing The Monasteric Goats, which is full of that stuff. It's about a secret unit called Project Jedi, a secret special forces unit. And I met one of the heads of Project Jedi, and he said it was a series of levels. And I said, what was level 1? He said, level 1 was observation. You walk into a room, how many chairs are in the room? The super soldier would just know. So I said, what was level 2? He said, level 2 was intuition. You're at a fork in the road, you go left, you go right, you go right. So I said, what was level 3? He said, level 3 was invisibility. So I said, that's quite a leap from level 2. I said, well, actual invisibility. And he said, at first, but after a while, we adapted it to trying to find a way of not being seen. So I said, like camouflage? And he went, no. And level 4 was they had a master sergeant who could stop the heart of a goat just by wanting it to stop. And I said, did you ever manage it? He said, one time, but his heart got damaged in the process. So I said, what was the goat psychically fighting back? And he said, no, the goat didn't stand a chance. So one time they had 30 goats in a room and they were all staying at goat number 16 and goat number 17 fell over. Which I guess is collateral damage. Anyway, back to Broadmoor. So Tony told me that he stayed in his room a lot because on one side of him he had the Stockwell Strangler and on the other side of him he had the Tiptoe Through the Tulips rapist, and he found them frightening and unsavoury, so he stayed in his room. And in his medical notes they said that proved that he was aloof and grandiose. So only in Broadmoor would not wanting to hang out with serial killers be a sign of madness. Anyway, I left Broadmoor, left Tony, and I thought he seemed completely normal, but what did I know? So I wrote to his clinician, Anthony Maiden, and I said, so what's the story? And his clinician wrote back and he said, yes, we accept that Tony's story is true. We accept he faked madness because his delusions that had seemed very cliche to begin with vanished the minute he got to Broadmoor. However, he went on, we've assessed him and we've determined that what he is a psychopath. And in fact, faking madness is exactly the kind of cunning and manipulative act of the psychopath. He said it's on the checklist, cunning, manipulative. And I said, what else? And another one of his clinicians said, the pinstripe suit, classic psychopath. It speaks to items 1 and 2 on the checklist, grandiose sense of self-worth and glibness, superficial charm. So all the things that seemed most ordinary about Tony was evidence, according to his clinicians, that he was crazy in this other way. He was a psychopath. And Anthony Maiden said, if I want to know more about psychopaths, I can go on a course, like a psychopath spotting course, run by Robert Hare, who's like the father of modern psychopathy research. So I did. I went on a psychopath spotting course in a marquee in West Wales with Bob Hare, the king of psychopathy research. And I am now a certified in that I have a certificate of attendance and I have to say a very adept psychopath spotter. So the statistic, according to Hare and many others, is that 1 in 100 regular people is a psychopath. So how many people are in this room? Let's say 500 people in this room. 5 of you are psychopaths. Although it's possible it could be more, because one of the items on the checklist is grandiose sense of self-worth. So it could be that everybody who came to the conference decided to come to a conference called Are You a Psychopath? Because psychopaths love to hear talks about psychopaths. So there could be, say, 20, it could be, what I'm saying is it could be carnage by the end of the night. But Robert Hare said to me that that figure rises to 4% of CEOs and business leaders. He said you are 4 times more likely to have a psychopath at the top of the tree than at the bottom. And he said this is the solution to all the great mysteries. Why the wars, why the injustice, why is capitalism so cruel at times? It's because of corporate psychopaths. He said this is the answer to all the mysteries, yet nobody's talking about it. He said you should get yourself some corporate psychopaths to interview. But I thought, I'm not going to put my new psychopath spotting skills to philanthropic use. What I'm going to do is think about all the people in my past who had crossed me to see which of them I could out as psychopaths. So, obviously, it goes without saying, first on the bill was A.A. Gill, the Sunday Times columnist who had just written a column about how he had shot a baboon on safari because, like all of us, he wondered what it would be like to shoot a person, which is classic psychopath. Plus, he always gives my documentaries very bad reviews, which is classic psychopath. I actually bumped into A.A. Gill quite recently at a conference, an award ceremony. He came bounding over to me and said, I hear I'm in your book about psychopaths. Don't worry, I would never sue another journalist. So I said, you know how you wrote that column about how you'd shot a baboon because, like all of us, you wondered what it'd be like to shoot a person. I said, it's not all of us. It's not a normal thing to think. It's just you. So he said, well, you don't hunt, so you wouldn't understand. So I said, I sell more books than you do. So I won. Then I remembered, I hope I've got time for this short digression. 50, yeah, we're doing okay. I remembered that about 20 years earlier, I had interviewed a Haitian death squad leader called Toto Constant, who'd got away with it because he was secretly working for the CIA, and he escaped Haiti and moved in with his mother in Queens. And I thought, that'll be a funny story, a Haitian dictator, a Haitian death squad leader living with his mother in Queens. So it turned out it wasn't a funny story. All he wanted to do was protest his innocence. And I was interviewing him. I remember he met me on the street outside his house wearing a pinstripe suit. And he started to cry as he was protesting his innocence to me. And I looked up and I realized that he was only pretending to cry. A grown man in a pinstripe suit was pretending to cry in front of me. And at the time I thought, that's weird, that's very odd. But after doing the course, I realized that that's on the checklist. Shallow affect, an inability to experience a range of emotions. What Robert Hare says is that you get this eerie sense, because another item on the checklist is glibness, superficial charm. You get this eerie sense that that it's all on the surface, all the emotions are on the surface, and there's nothing going on underneath. I remember Robert Hare said to me, when you meet a real one, it's stunning. So I thought I need to interview Toto Constant again. So I discovered that he was in prison in upstate New York for mortgage fraud. Another item on the checklist is criminal versatility. So I went to see him, and he started saying to me, I just want people to like me. It's very, very important that people like me. And he said it a few times to me, and finally I said to him, isn't that a weakness, wanting people to like you? And he said, oh, no, it's not a weakness. And I'll tell you why. If you can get people to like you, you can manipulate them to do whatever you want them to do. So I said, so it's not real? He said, no. Said, yeah. I remember when I did the Hare course, I said to somebody at the end of the course, shouldn't you feel sorry for them if it's not their fault, if it's a brain anomaly? And he said, why should we feel sorry for them? They don't give a shit about us. But that's a question worth thinking about, I think. I think that was a slightly too dismissive answer. I'm going to very quickly read out some of the items on the checklist, just so you can find out whether you're a psychopath or not. Glibness, superficial charm, grandiose self-worth, need for stimulation, proneness to boredom, I'll skip a few. Lack of empathy, that's obviously the big one. Poor behavioural controls, promiscuous sexual behaviour. That would surprise us, because for me it's been quite a long time, but I look back on those days with some fondness. Many short-term marital relationships, juvenile delinquency. So those are maybe half of the 20 items. Anyway, then I remembered what Robert Hare said about corporate psychopaths. And I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. So I wrote to Bernie Madoff and I said, can I come and interview you in prison to find out if you're a psychopath? And he didn't write back. So then I changed tack. I wrote to a famous asset stripper from the 1990s called Chainsaw Al Dunlap. There he is. He was all, who does he look like? I know, Donald Trump. So he was famous for firing people with a joke. That was one of his kind of trademarks. He would go into a failing business, shut down 30% of the factories, fire 30% of the workforce, always with a joke. So one time somebody said to him, I've just bought myself a new car. And he said, you may have a new car, but what you don't have is a job. Also, he once threatened his first wife with a knife and said he always wondered what human flesh tasted like. Also, he didn't turn up to either of his parents' funerals. So I wrote to him and I said, I believe that you may have a very special brain anomaly that makes you fearless and interested in the predatory spirit. Can I come and interview you about your special brain anomaly? And he said, come on over. So I went to Al Dunlap's grand Florida mansion, which was filled with sculptures and paintings of predatory animals. There he is. He gave me a tour of his gardens. He said, over there you've got lions and tigers, panthers. He was saying this in a less effeminate way. Eagles. I said it's like Midas and the Queen of Narnia flew over a particularly fierce zoo and turned everything into stone and transported everything here. And he said, what? And I said, nothing. And I said, it was just a jumble of words that... And so, okay. So we went into his kitchen, and it was Al, his second wife, Judy, and his bodyguard, Sean. And I said, you know how I said in my email that you may have a very special brain anomaly? And he said, yeah, it's an amazing theory. It's like Star Trek. You're going where no man has gone before. And I said, well, some psychiatrists would say that this makes you... He said, what? And I said, a psychopath. And in fact, I have a list in my pocket of psychopathic character traits. Can I go through the list with you? And he said, okay, I think what saved me was that Al Dunlap, like all of us, loves nothing more than a mental health checklist. So I said grandiose sense of self-worth, which would have been a hard one for him to deny because he was standing underneath a giant oil painting of himself. He said, well, you got to believe in you. And I said... cunning, manipulative. He said, that's leadership. I said, shallow affect. He said, who wants to be weighed down with nonsense emotions? I said, actually, here we go. Impulsivity was just another way of saying quick analysis. Some people spend a week weighing up the pros and cons. Me, I look at it for 10 minutes, and if the pros outweigh the cons, go. A lack of remorse frees you up to move forward and achieve more great things. What's the point of drowning yourself in sorrow? You have to judge yourself at the end of the day, he said. Do I respect me? And if you do, fine. You've had a great run. I said, do you feel good about yourself? He said, I do. Oh, I do. Looking back at my life is like going to a movie about a person who did all this stuff. My gosh, I did that. And through it all, I did it my way. So there was Al Dunlap going down the psychopath checklist, redefining many of the items as business positives. But I do want to close. I do feel it's incumbent on me to close with this thought. I did notice something happening to me the day that I was at Al Dunlap's house, which was that every time he said something that wasn't psychopathic, I thought, well, that's okay, I won't put that in my book. So he said no to juvenile delinquency, early behaviour problems. He said he got accepted into West Point and they don't let delinquents into West Point. He said no to many short-term marital relationships. He's only been married twice. Admittedly, his first marriage ended when he threatened his first wife with a knife and said he always wondered what human flesh tasted like, but his second marriage has lasted 41 years. So when he said these confusing things, I thought, well, that's okay, I won't put that in the book. And then I kind of realised that becoming a psychopath spotter had turned me a little bit psychopathic in my zest to kind of shove Al Dunlap into a box marked psychopath. I was so desperate to find a perfect corporate psychopath. I was just willing to ignore the stuff that didn't suit me. And when I got back to London, I had dinner with a friend of mine, a documentary maker, Adam Curtis, and he said, well, it's what we all do as journalists, isn't it? We go around the world with our notepads in our hands and we wait for the gems. And the gems are always the outermost aspects of that person's personality. And like medieval tapestry makers, we kind of stitch together the gems and we leave all the ordinary stuff on the floor. And Adam said, we all know that what we do is odd, but none of us like to think about it. And I think in that sentence, Adam really summed up journalism. And also, I think, summed up social media in the way that we just destroy people for a tweet that comes out badly, and so on. Later on, I met this woman called Charlotte, who was a guest booker for the kind of TV show, the daytime TV shows where everybody like yells at each other. And Charlotte said, because I was thinking about, the way we just stitch together madness as a way of entertaining people. And Charlotte said that she had actually developed a secret trick out of that idea. And the secret trick was that she would ask the prospective guests what medication they were on. And if it was a kind of scary-sounding medication, like lithium, she said you wouldn't want them on the show because you don't want them to go on the show and then go off and then kill themselves. But if it was a kind of medication that implied a fun-sounding mental illness, like Prozac, she said that's perfect, because what you want is people on TV who are a little bit crazier than we are, and so we don't feel so worried about our own craziness, but not so crazy that we feel exploitative watching them. Charlotte said what you want is smoke and mirrors exploitation, not real exploitation. And later on still, I'm going to move to questions in a second, but unfortunately I'm going to end on a really low note, so I apologise. I discovered this kind of zest for labelling people and diagnosing people by their maddest edges has become so out of control in America that not so long ago, a little girl called Rebecca Riley was diagnosed as having bipolar disorder and given antipsychotic medication, and she was given an accidental overdose of the psychotic medication and antipsychotic medication and died. And the reason why she was diagnosed as being bipolar was because she had a temper tantrum, and the age when she was diagnosed as bipolar was 2, and she died when she was 4. So, this is the dangers of over-labelling and over-diagnosing. But, I think both stories are true. I don't think one story makes the other one untrue. I think there's too much of a zest for labelling. We love nothing more as human beings than to declare other people insane. You see that on social media all the time. We love to reduce people to stereotypes like sociopath and psychopath. But I think at the same time, Robert Hare is absolutely right that capitalism at its worst, at its most remorseless, rewards psychopathic character traits, the lack of remorse, the lack of empathy, the grandiosity, and that psychopathy is such a powerful brain anomaly, it's maybe remoulded society all wrong, and maybe we are all, in a way, victims of psychopathy. Thank you. Great. So, so that gives me 5 minutes for questions.
Absolutely. We've got time for 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah.
So.
I just said that if you think your boss is a psychopath, that means they are. I hope that's the message you will take from my talk.
Go for it. I'm so glad I didn't wear a pinstripe suit. By
no,
the way.
but you know.
Thanks.
Does anybody have any questions? Hello.
Everyone's looking for the key to success. Do you think you're making your own job harder by saying that more people are psychopathic at the top? And will you have people who ape psychopaths and try to make themselves like that to become successful?
That's a really good question. And what I'm reminded of, because I do really believe that, and in fact, I remember another psychologist called S.E. Viding once said to me that 25% of prisoners are psychopaths. And these are like experts. These people aren't coming up with these figures from nowhere. But they're responsible for 60 to 70% of unrest in prisons. So they're like a stone thrown in a pond. And when you ask that question, I remember the time, many years ago, I worked for an editor who, I'm not going to say that he was a psychopath, but he certainly displayed many psychopathic traits. He was very ruthless and would say to me, get the story, get the story. And all of us down below started utilising slightly more ruthless and slightly more manipulative tactics than we ever would have done normally to please this person. And it does make me think, wow, a charismatic psychopath in a position of power can really influence people to behave more psychopathically, just like you said. Yeah, there are questions. The other question was, am I doing myself harm in my career by saying there's too many psychopaths at the top? Actually, quite the opposite. I get offered I've noticed lately, kind of corporate talks, like hedge fund managers who want to find out if they're psychopaths. And so actually, yeah. And sometimes they come up to me at the Q&A afterwards and say, at the signing afterwards and say, I'm a psychopath. My hand to God, that happened to me at a business conference about a year ago.
Hi. Jon, I've read your book a recent book on public shaming. I was interested in, do you think there'll ever be a time where we'll all have done something a little bit wrong in the public sphere and it becomes totally normalized? Or do you think we'll forever be stuck in this sort of massive cycle, as you describe in the book, of blowout impact on the individual who does something wrong, often unintentionally?
Sure, it's a really, really good question. And the perfect world, now that everybody is being outed for some kind of mistake, that's a poor phraseology in a tweet is now being considered by hundreds of thousands of people to be a clue to that person's secret inner evil. Like you make some joke that comes out badly and they're just, ripped apart. It's horrible what's happening. And so will there be some time in the future when everybody has been shamed and so shaming no longer has power? And I agree that would be a great world. But I think, unfortunately, sometimes some people who've been bullied become very empathetic people as a result of it. But other people who've been bullied respond by bullying others. And a great psychiatrist called James Gilligan said to me, this is in my new book about public shaming, said to me, all violence is an attempt to replace shame with self-esteem. And I think that's a real problem. But let me just add really quickly, one really interesting thing is, for my next project, I've been spending a lot of time lately in the world of pornography. I've been spending a lot of time with porn stars. And one of them said something really interesting.
Just wondering where you're going with this.
No. One of them said something really interesting to me lately. They said there's so much free porn on the internet that what's happening is that millions and millions of 18-year-old girls, like way more than ever in the past, all want to be porn stars. And so what you were saying about a time when everybody's much more open and stigma goes out of the window, that seems to be happening in the pornography world. And it's a problem for the established porn stars because it's like the market is flooded and they hate it. But yeah, there you go.
Next year. Wonderful. We've got time for one more question.
Thank you. From porn stars to...
Oh,
sorry. From porn stars to politicians. Can you tell me, do you think to be a leader of a country, or a prime minister or a president, you have to have psychopathic traits?
I mean, I would hope, very much hope not. I believe hair's statistic. Some people see me as being like anti-labelling and anti-psychiatry, because certainly the second half of this book is really about how you shouldn't go psychopath spotting crazy, like don't do what I did. But because I did get very drunk with my psychopath spotting powers and started seeing them everywhere. But I do believe hair statistic, that they're small in number, 4% of the population, but that's 4 times more than the general populace. And they are rewarded, they really are. And I think that they're rewarded, for 2 reasons they're rewarded. One is because capitalism, shareholders, boards of directors, they love psychopathic skills. If you can go into a business and fire people and not feel any remorse, you're going to fire people better. They're charismatic, they're charming, they're unempathetic. These are all things that are rewarded. But I think there's a second reason why they do so well, and it's that if you have no empathy, this is what somebody said to me, and in fact I'll finish with this because it's quite chilling. Somebody said to me, it's like the end of Carrie when the hand comes up. Somebody said to me, if you take empathy out of the equation, what is left? Just the will to win. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jon.